Hey there. Get comfortable wherever you are tonight. We're going to talk about one of the most haunting stories ever written. And if you fall asleep along the way, that's absolutely fine. This story works beautifully whether you're awake or drifting off to rest. Tonight's book is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. A man sails upriver into the African jungle and discovers something terrifying about human nature. The story begins on a yacht called the Nelly, anchored on the Thames River in London. 5 men sit on deck as the sun goes down. One of them is a sailor named Charlie Marlowe. He's different from the others. He's the kind of man who tells stories that change how you see things. Marlowe looks out at the river and says something unexpected. He says, this place, London, was once one of the dark places of the earth. Imagine a Roman commander sent here 2,000 years ago. Swamps, savages, terrible cold. The end of the world. That's what darkness felt like to him. But Marlowe isn't really talking about Romans. He's leading somewhere else. He tells the men about a job he once took with a trading company in Africa. As a boy, Marlowe loved maps. He'd press his finger on the blank spaces and dream about what was there. Africa had the biggest blank space of all. There was a river on that map. It coiled through the continent like a snake. Marlowe says it fascinated him the way a snake fascinates a bird. Years later, Marlowe's aunt had connections. She pulled strings with a Belgian trading company, and they gave him a job captaining a steamboat on that very river. To get the job, Marlowe traveled to Brussels. He described it later as a city that always made him think of a whited sepulchre. Beautiful outside, dead inside. In the company office, 2 women sat knitting black wool in the waiting room. They barely looked up, like guards at the gate of some grim underworld. The company director shook Marlowe's hand briefly. A pale, plump, ordinary man. There was nothing remarkable about him except an air of quiet, comfortable authority. Before leaving Brussels, a company doctor measured Marlowe's skull with calipers. He asked calmly whether there was any history of madness in Marlowe's family. The doctor said the changes that happen out there happen inside. He said it as if he'd seen men go to Africa sane and come back as something else entirely. Marlowe's aunt saw him off with great enthusiasm. She spoke about the company's noble mission, civilizing the savages, bringing light to the dark continent. Marlowe felt uneasy. He wasn't going to save anyone. He was going to fix a steamboat and earn a living. But he didn't say that to her. He boarded a French steamer heading south along the African coast. Day after day, the ship crept past an endless wall of green. The continent just sat there. Enormous. The coast slid by, green, monotonous, edged with white surf. Sometimes he saw a flag, a shed, a clearing, then more forest. The heat pressed down like a hand. Occasionally they stopped at tiny settlements. A few sheds, a customs post, people waving from shore. Then the steamer would pull away again into open water, and silence returned. Once they passed a French warship anchored near shore, lobbing shells into the jungle. No target visible. Just a continent being shelled by a small iron vessel. It was absurd. Men were dying of fever on every ship along the coast. The whole operation felt like a bad dream. Pointless, feverish, disconnected from anything real. Marlowe watched it all. Finally, Marlowe reached the river mouth. He transferred to a small coastal vessel that took him 30 miles upriver to the company's outer station. His real journey was beginning. The outer station hit him hard. Cleared hillside, half-built railway, rocks blasted apart for no clear purpose. Machinery rusting in the sun beside stacks of drain pipes. A chain gang passed him. 6 African men linked by iron collars, guarded by another African with a rifle. Their eyes were blank. Their bones showed through their skin. Then Marlowe found the grove of death. In the shade of trees, skeletal workers lay dying. They had crawled there to rest and never gotten up again. Marlowe stepped back from the grove, shaken. And then he met the most surreal figure of all, the company accountant. Dressed in immaculate white, not a wrinkle, not a stain. The accountant kept perfect books. His ledgers were flawless. Outside his window, men were dying. But his columns all added up. He mentioned a name to Marlowe, a certain Mr. Kurtz. A very remarkable person, the accountant said. Sends more ivory than all the other stations combined. Remember that name, Kurtz? We'll be hearing a lot more about him. Marlowe left the outer station on foot, 200 miles through the African interior to reach Central Station. No road, just a narrow path wending through tall grass. African porters carried his supplies. They passed through abandoned villages, empty huts, cold fire pits, paths overgrown. The countryside felt emptied out, hollowed by something Marlowe couldn't name. Beside the path, Marlowe found a body. An African worker shot through the forehead, lying face up in the grass. No explanation. No one stopped, they just walked on past. After 15 days of walking, Central Station appeared. A fenced compound on a muddy riverbank. White walls, red earth, a courtyard full of nothing happening. Everything felt stuck. The first thing Marlowe learned was that his steamboat was at the bottom of the river. Sunk 2 days before he arrived. An accident, they said. Marlowe didn't believe it for a second. Then he met the manager of Central Station. A man of medium height with cold, pale eyes and a thin smile that never warmed anything. His handshake made Marlowe uneasy immediately. The manager had one remarkable talent. He never got sick. In a place where fever killed most Europeans within months, this man simply endured. That was his only qualification for leadership. The manager spoke of Kurtz with careful concern. Mr. Kurtz is ill, he said. Very ill. We must reach him quickly. But somehow nothing was done quickly at Central Station. Marlowe began to suspect the steamer hadn't sunk by accident. Someone wanted to delay the trip upriver. Someone didn't want Kurtz to be rescued. The manager needed Kurtz to fail. Around the station, company agents loafed about carrying long walking sticks. Marlowe called them pilgrims. They whispered constantly about one thing only: ivory. Ivory was everything here. Ivory. The word hung in the air like incense. They prayed to it, dreamed of it, schemed for it. You'd think they were speaking the name of a god. One evening, Marlowe visited the station's brickmaker. A young man who'd been there over a year and hadn't made a single brick. His real job was something else entirely: spying. The brickmaker tried to figure Marlowe out. Who were his connections in Brussels? Was he here to spy for the same people backing Kurtz? Every question was a probe disguised as small talk. Something on the wall caught Marlowe's eye. A painting by Kurtz. A blindfolded woman carrying a lit torch through darkness. Her face was lit by the flame she couldn't see. It was haunting. The brickmaker told Marlowe that Kurtz was destined for great things. Europe's finest. A universal genius. The kind of man the company's highest directors had personally chosen and protected. Something shifted inside Marlowe. He hadn't met Kurtz, but this unseen man was becoming the most real thing in a world of hollow pretenders. He wanted to meet the voice behind the legend. To reach Kurtz, Marlowe needed to fix the steamer. And to fix the steamer, he needed rivets. Simple iron rivets. The coast had thousands, but none came. Weeks passed, then months. Everything at Central Station moved in deliberate slow motion. Requests disappeared. Supplies never arrived. The whole place operated on a system of calculated neglect disguised as incompetence. Then the El Dorado exploring expedition arrived. The manager's uncle leading a caravan of donkeys and supplies. Not explorers. Treasure hunters, crude and greedy, looking for easy ivory. One evening Marlowe couldn't sleep. He wandered near the river and overheard the manager and his uncle talking on the bank. Their voices carried clearly across the still water. They were talking about Kurtz. The problem, they said, was that Kurtz sent more ivory than everyone else combined. That made him powerful. That made him dangerous to the manager's position. The uncle said something that chilled Marlowe to the bone. The climate may do away with this difficulty for us. They were hoping the jungle would kill Kurtz before anyone had to act. After that night, Kurtz became something different to Marlowe. Not just a name anymore. The only real thing in a world of pretenders. The one man in this hollow place who actually did something. At last the rivets came. Marlowe threw himself into the repair. Hammering, fitting, testing. The steamer slowly came back to life under his hands. It felt like the only honest work for miles. Supplies were loaded, firewood stacked on deck, a crew assembled. The cannibals Marlowe hired were strong, capable men. Their payment was brass wire, which they could trade for food along the way. They pushed off from Central Station on a gray morning. The manager and his pilgrims aboard, rifles ready. Marlowe at the wheel. The river swallowed them almost immediately, upstream into silence. Traveling up that river, Marlowe said, was like going back to the very beginning of the world. Vegetation rioted on the banks. Trees were enormous, immovable, like kings waiting in judgment. The silence was overwhelming, not empty silence, a living silence full of watching. You felt eyes in the trees. Something ancient and patient observing from the green darkness all around you. Marlowe kept his focus on the water, reading the river's surface for snags, sandbars, hidden rocks. A sunken log could rip the steamer's hull open and strand them all. Concentration was survival. The African fireman fed the boiler with wood. Marlowe watched him work, filing his teeth to points, strange tribal scars on his chest. He believed an evil spirit lived inside the engine. Marlowe thought about civilization and what it really means. Back home, a policeman on the corner, a butcher shop, neighbors who'd notice if you screamed. Nothing, just you in the wilderness. At an abandoned hut on the riverbank, Marlowe found a tattered book, an inquiry into some points of seamanship. The margins were covered in cipher, tiny notes in what looked like a code. 50 miles from Kurtz's station now. The river narrowed, the jungle closed in tighter. Every mile felt like another step deeper into something that had been waiting for them all along. At night, drums. They came from everywhere and nowhere. A steady beating that traveled through the water and the air and the wood of the hull beneath Marlowe's feet. The crew grew hungry. Their supply of rotting hippo meat had run out. 30 strong men with nothing to eat, but a few handfuls of brass wire that couldn't be chewed or swallowed. Marlowe marveled at their restraint. 30 starving men who could easily have overpowered 5 Europeans. But they didn't. Something held them back, some inner discipline he couldn't fully explain. Then the fog came. Thick white fog, rolling in off the water like a blanket, swallowing everything. The steamer stopped dead. You couldn't see 20 feet in any direction. They were blind. From somewhere in the fog came a cry. Not a bird or an animal. A long, drawn-out human shriek of despair that froze every man on deck. Then silence. Then it came again, closer. The pilgrims grabbed their rifles, hands shaking. Marlowe stayed calm. He could read this situation. The cry wasn't a war cry. It was grief. Something out there was mourning, not attacking. The fog lifted like a curtain. Slowly the riverbanks emerged green, close, still. And somewhere just ahead, around the next bend, Kurtz waited. Marlowe could feel it now. They were very close. Arrows came first. Small sticks flying from the green wall of jungle, thudding into the wooden hull. Then more, whistling past ears, clattering on deck. The shore had come alive with violence. The helmsman panicked. He let go of the wheel and grabbed a rifle, firing wildly into the trees. Marlowe shouted at him to steer, but the man was beyond hearing, lost in pure animal fear. A long spear flew through the open wheelhouse. It struck the helmsman in the side. The man looked down at it with an expression of profound surprise, then fell backward at Marlowe's feet. Marlowe threw his blood-soaked shoes overboard. He couldn't wear them. The helmsman's blood was warm on his feet. That small detail, the warmth, stayed with him longer than anything else from that day. Marlowe blew the steam whistle. One long, terrible blast that tore through the jungle. The attackers scattered like birds. Silence returned. The river flowed on, carrying them toward whatever came next. In the aftermath, Marlowe felt a strange, hollow sadness. Not just for the helmsman, for himself. He was sure Kurtz was already dead. That voice he'd never heard was lost forever. What surprised Marlowe most was the intensity of his disappointment. He realized he'd been looking forward to hearing Kurtz speak more than anything. The man's voice had become his compass. They buried the helmsman that evening, slipped his body into the brown water before the pilgrims could use it as an excuse for more violence. The river took him without a sound. Then, there it was. Around the final bend, the inner station appeared. A long, low building on a hilltop overlooking the river. Grass growing through the roof. A clearing trampled flat by many feet. A figure burst from the tree line, waving frantically. A young man in the strangest clothes Marlowe had ever seen. Patches of blue, red, yellow, green sewn over every inch of fabric. A human patchwork. The young Russian had been living with Kurtz for months. A wanderer, an adventurer, barely 25 years old. He spoke about Kurtz the way a devoted follower speaks about a prophet. The mystery of the cipher book was solved. It belonged to the Harlequin. The strange notes in the margins weren't code at all. They were Russian. He'd been annotating his only book for years. "You don't talk to Kurtz," the Harlequin said. "You listen." The man could talk for hours about love, justice, the meaning of existence. And you believed every word. His voice did something to you. Kurtz had explored hundreds of miles of jungle. He'd found ivory in quantities no one thought possible. He'd written reports, made maps, composed music, painted pictures. He'd also become something more than human to the tribes. "You can't judge him like you judge an ordinary man," the Harlequin insisted. His eyes were pleading. He needed Marlowe to understand. Kurtz had enlarged his mind. That was the phrase he kept using. Marlowe raised his binoculars and studied the compound more closely. A crude fence of tall posts surrounded the station. Each post was topped with a round decorative ornament. Carved balls, he thought at first. He adjusted the focus. The round shapes snapped into clarity. They weren't ornaments. They were human heads. Dried, shrunken, eyes closed, facing the house. Kurtz's trophies. Kurtz's warning to the world. Let that settle for a moment. Kurtz had become both god and devil. The man who wrote about civilizing savages had decorated his garden with human skulls. The contradiction was absolute. The Harlequin admitted everything when pressed. Kurtz raided villages. He took ivory by force. The tribes offered it willingly too, out of terror, out of reverence. The line between the two had vanished. The manager called them unsound methods. That was his phrase. Polite, managerial, bloodless. As if genocide and self-deification were merely a matter of poor technique. The language of bureaucracy covering the abyss. The tribes had crawled to Kurtz with their ivory. Literally crawled. They approached him on their bellies across that trampled clearing. He had become the thing at the center of their universe. Marlowe climbed the hill and entered the station. Inside, dim light, a cot. And on it, the man himself, Kurtz, alive but barely. A skeleton draped in cloth, with eyes that burned like coals. Kurtz looked like a man made of ivory himself. White, smooth, stretched thin over bone. His head was shaved and gleaming. But those eyes, enormous, burning, they held Marlowe and wouldn't let go. And then Kurtz spoke. Even dying, that voice filled the room. He talked about his plans, his station, his ivory. My intended, my ivory, my station. Everything was his. The possessiveness was total. Outside the station, a figure appeared on the riverbank. A woman, tall, magnificent, draped in brass and striped cloth. She walked toward the steamer with the bearing of a queen surveying her domain. She stopped at the water's edge and raised her arms. The gesture was enormous. The whole riverbank seemed to answer. The trees bowing, the water stilling. The air holding its breath for her. The manager declared the situation settled. Kurtz's methods were unsound. He must be brought back to civilization, which meant removed from power. The company would take over his ivory and his station. But Kurtz didn't want to leave. This wilderness had whispered things to him. It had spoken to something inside him that no European drawing room could ever reach. The jungle was his now, and he was the jungle's. The Harlequin whispered a warning. It was Kurtz who ordered the attack on the steamer. He didn't want to be rescued. He wanted to be left alone in his kingdom of skulls and adoration. Night fell over the inner station. Marlowe dozed on the steamer deck. When he woke, the stretcher where Kurtz lay was empty. The blanket thrown back. Kurtz had crawled into the darkness alone. Marlowe didn't raise the alarm. He didn't wake the pilgrims. He went after Kurtz alone. He found a trail through the grass. Not footprints, but body marks. Kurtz had been crawling on all fours toward the jungle fires. He found Kurtz at the edge of the jungle, on his hands and knees in the tall grass, facing the fires where drums beat and shadows moved. Like a man trying to crawl back into a dream, Marlowe faced him in the dark. This was the moment. Two men at the edge of everything. Kurtz's soul was stripped bare. There was nothing between him and the wilderness, but the night air itself. Marlowe spoke to the part of Kurtz that was still European. "You will be utterly lost," he said. Lost. The word hung between them. Kurtz heard it. Something behind those burning eyes shifted. The jungle called. The drums beat, but Kurtz let Marlowe help him up. Together they struggled back through the grass. One man carrying another away from the fire, back toward the river and the waiting steamer. They loaded Kurtz onto the steamer the next morning, carried on a stretcher like a broken idol removed from its temple. The pilgrims handled him carelessly. To them he was already finished. As the steamer pulled away, a crowd gathered on the bank. Hundreds of faces watching from the jungle's edge. And there, in front of them all, the African woman appeared one final time. She stretched her bare arms after the departing steamer, held them out across the water as if trying to pull the ship back. Magnificent. Tragic. She didn't make a sound. She didn't need to. The pilgrims raised their rifles toward her. Marlowe lunged for the steam whistle and blew it hard. The blast of sound scattered the crowd. Fog and smoke rolled across the water. When it cleared, she was gone. The journey downriver began. The current carried them faster than they'd come. Kurtz lay on the steamer's deck, growing weaker by the hour, but his mouth never stopped moving. He talked and talked. Kurtz pressed a packet of papers into Marlowe's hands. Letters. A photograph. His pamphlet on civilizing the natives. "Keep them safe," he said. Marlowe felt the weight of trust passing between them. Marlowe read the pamphlet that night. 17 pages of soaring, beautiful prose about bringing light to Africa. Noble, eloquent. And then, scrawled at the end in shaky handwriting, "Exterminate all the brutes." Beautiful words concealing monstrous intent. Or was it the other way around? Monstrous honesty breaking through beautiful lies. The pamphlet was Kurtz in miniature. Idealism and savagery in the same hand. Kurtz's fever deepened. He drifted between consciousness and delirium, whispering constantly. Plans, orders, justifications. His voice grew smaller but never stopped. The steamer carried him downstream like a dying current. The steamer's engine coughed and died. More delays. Repairs in fading light while mosquitoes swarmed. Kurtz grew thinner by the day. Time was running out, and the river didn't care. Watching Kurtz's face was like watching a veil being torn away. Layer after layer stripped back, ambition, genius, madness, terror, until something final and unspeakable showed through beneath it all. On the last evening, Kurtz's face went through everything. Pride, terror, despair, a flicker of something like belief. Then a horrible clarity. His eyes widened. He saw it. Whatever it was, he saw it completely. The horror. That was all he said. 2 words, the same word repeated. Then his face locked into that expression of absolute knowledge, and Kurtz was gone. Can you hear that silence? The manager's boy stuck his head through the door the next morning. Contemptuous matter of fact. Mr. Kurtz, he dead. Just like that. The greatest voice in the jungle, reduced to a servant's announcement. Then Marlowe himself fell sick. Fever took him. He lay burning on the steamer as it carried him downstream. The jungle had tried to claim him too. He came very close to following Kurtz into that darkness. He survived. Barely. They carried him off the steamer at the coast and put him on a ship home. The worst was over. But nothing would ever be the same. The river had changed him. Kurtz had changed him. Brussels again. the sepulchral city. People walking quickly through gray streets, worried about small things. Marlowe wanted to scream at them. You don't know. You don't know what's out there, what men become. Their small concerns, office politics, dinner plans, the price of things. It all seemed obscene to him now. These people lived on the surface of life. They had no idea what lay beneath. A company official came for Kurtz's papers. Cold, efficient. He wanted the documents for the company's records. Marlowe gave him some. But the private letters, the photograph, those he kept. A journalist came next, wanting Kurtz's brilliant writings. Marlowe gave him the pamphlet, but first he tore off that final page. The one with the scrawled postscript. Exterminate all the brutes stayed with Marlowe alone. Marlowe kept the private letters. They were addressed to the intended, Kurtz's fiancée back in Brussels. A woman who had been waiting, believing, mourning for over a year. He owed her something. Months passed in Brussels. Marlowe tried to resume his life, but the city felt like a stage set. Painted facades hiding nothing. Every polite conversation reminded him of the lies that held this world together. He decided to visit the intended, not because he wanted to, because he had to. The letters were hers. Kurtz's memory was hers. And she deserved to hear from someone who'd been there at the end. He walked to her house on a quiet residential street. A tall building with heavy curtains in the windows. The light was fading. Everything about the approach felt like entering a kind of tomb. The door opened into a high-ceilinged parlor. Dark furniture. A grand piano with its lid closed. A marble fireplace cold and unlit. And there she stood, the intended, still dressed in black more than a year later. Her grief was immaculate. Preserved like a pressed flower. She had been living in the moment of Kurtz's death since the news arrived, holding it close, refusing to let it fade or change shape. She spoke of Kurtz's greatness, his mind, his noble heart, his vision for the future. She was describing someone Marlowe almost recognized. The man Kurtz might have been, before the jungle stripped him bare. As she talked, Marlowe saw Kurtz, not a memory of vision. The emaciated face superimposed over the dark parlor, those burning eyes, that open mouth. The horror whispering behind every word she spoke. I knew him as well as anyone could, she said. Better than anyone, I had his confidence. I knew his heart. Marlowe sat very still. He knew what she could never be allowed to know. Two versions of Kurtz filled the room. Her Kurtz, brilliant, noble, taken too soon. His Kurtz, a skull collector whispering horror in the dark. Both were true. Neither was complete. The gap between them was everything. Then she asked the question. The one Marlowe had been dreading. His last words, she said. Tell me. I need something to live with. Please. I need. To hear what he said at the very end. Marlowe paused. The truth sat in his mouth like a stone. The horror, he could taste the words, but they would destroy her. Everything she'd built to survive would crumble into dust. The last word he pronounced, Marlowe said quietly, was your name. The lie came out like a sigh, soft, final. The room seemed to darken around them both, and just like that, the truth was buried forever. I knew it, she cried. I was sure of it. Her face flooded with relief and gratitude. She pressed her hands together and wept openly. The lie gave her exactly what she needed. Permission to keep believing. Marlowe left the house. The street outside was completely dark. He walked away quickly, as if escaping something. Behind him, a window glowed softly. Inside, a woman held her grief like a treasure, undisturbed. Back on the Thames, Marlowe falls silent. His story is done. The other men on the yacht sit without moving. The pipe has gone out. No one speaks. The river flows on beneath them in the dark. The unnamed narrator, the one telling us Marlowe's story, looks out at the Thames. The river that once seemed so familiar now looks different. It stretches away into an enormous heart-stopping darkness. The tranquil waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth seemed to flow into the heart of an immense darkness. That's how Conrad ends it. The Thames itself becomes the Congo. Civilization becomes wilderness. Let that sit for a moment. The story is over, but the feeling stays. like waking from a dream you can't quite describe. The details fade, but the weight of it remains somewhere in your chest. Now let's talk about what this story actually means. Because it means many things. And people have been arguing about it for more than 100 years. Start with the lie. Was it mercy or cowardice? The story asks whether truth and compassion can coexist. Marlowe knew the truth, the horror. The intended needed compassion, the beautiful lie. He couldn't give her both. Nobody can, Conrad suggests. Not really. Kurtz's horror was clarity. He looked at what he'd become, at what any human can become without restraint, and named it honestly. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that mirror. Marlowe's horror was different. He survived. He saw and came back and had to keep living in a world that didn't know and didn't want to know. The burden of the witness is loneliness. Notice how the story is built. Darkness at the beginning, the Thames at sunset. Darkness at the end, the Thames at night. The frame holds everything. You start and finish in the same place, but everything has changed. Conrad built a story inside a story. We hear a narrator who hears Marlowe, who tells us about Kurtz. 3 layers of distance between us and the truth. That's not accidental. That's the whole point. Every river leads somewhere. The Congo led to Kurtz. The Thames leads to the sea. And every journey in this story is really a journey inward, into the parts of ourselves we'd rather not examine. The title itself says everything. Heart of Darkness. It means the center of the jungle. It means the center of the human soul. It means the truth at the core of civilization's proudest claims. All 3 at once. Kurtz is a mirror. That's why he frightens us. Not because he's a monster. Because he shows us what any person might become when the rules disappear and the wilderness whispers. Go ahead, no one is watching. But here's the twist. The company men are actually worse. They exploit without grandeur. They steal without even the courage to look at what they're doing. Their evil is perfectly comfortable, perfectly ordinary. The manager's evil is patient. He doesn't rage or dream or fall. He simply waits. He schemes in small ways. He lets others destroy themselves. His survival is his only skill, and it's enough. Marlowe understood the difference. Kurtz fell spectacularly, like an angel crashing to earth. The manager simply rotted in place, like fungus on a log. One is tragic, the other is just depressing. Marlowe chose Kurtz. He said so directly. Given the choice between the nightmare of grand passion and the nightmare of petty corruption, he chose the dreamer's ruin over the bureaucrat's rot. Now think about the women in this story. There are 4, and each one holds a different piece of the truth. The aunt who sends Marlowe off with noble delusions. The knitting women who guard the door to hell. The African mistress who embodies everything the jungle is. Wild, beautiful, sorrowful, unconquerable. And the intended who embodies everything Europe wants to believe about itself. Pure, grieving, eternally innocent. The intended can't hear the truth. Not because she's stupid, because the truth would destroy the structure of her entire world. Marlowe's lie protects not just one woman, but the whole illusion of European innocence. The African mistress is the opposite. She stands in full daylight. She hides nothing. Her love for Kurtz is naked. Her grief is loud. Her defiance is physical. She is everything the intended is not allowed to be. At its core, the novella is about restraint. What keeps a person human when there's nothing external forcing them to behave? Marlowe asks this question about everyone he meets. Very few pass the test. The cannibal crew showed more restraint than any European in the story. Starving men who chose not to eat the 5 white passengers they could have overpowered in seconds. Think about that. Civilization, Conrad suggests, isn't a place or a race. It's a practice, a daily discipline. A choice made over and over to restrain what the wilderness inside you wants to do. And anyone can fail at it. Traveling upriver equals traveling backward in time. That's Marlowe's explicit comparison. Every mile deeper into the jungle is 1,000 years further back in human history. The Congo is a time machine. Conrad's prose style does something unusual. It's dense and circling. It approaches meaning obliquely, the way fog approaches a ship. You feel the truth before you see it clearly. That disorientation is deliberate. The fog scenes are the story in miniature. You can't see what's ahead. You can't go back. You can only listen for what's coming, and try to read the invisible currents beneath the surface. Light and dark are reversed throughout the story. The civilized cities are the real sepulchres. The dark jungle is where truth lives. What we call enlightenment is often just lit ignorance. Ivory is the perfect symbol, white, pure-looking, valuable, beautiful when polished, and obtained through the darkest suffering imaginable. It's Europe's relationship with Africa in a single material. The skulls on fence posts are Kurtz's inner world made external. What most people hide, their worst impulses, their darkest pleasures, Kurtz puts on display. He's the only honest monster in the story. The horror. Two words that have echoed through 100 years of literature, film and philosophy. What exactly did Kurtz see in that final moment? What does it mean? There's no single answer. One reading, Kurtz saw his own depravity. The skulls, the raids, the worship he accepted, all of it reflected back at him. And in that final honest moment, he recoiled from what he had become. Another reading, Kurtz saw the truth of human nature itself. Not just his own, everyone's. The capacity for cruelty that lives in every person, held back only by convenience and habit. He named it for all of us. A third reading, Kurtz saw the entire colonial enterprise. The lies, the theft, the murder dressed up as civilization, and called it what it was. The horror is not personal, it's political. It's systemic, it's institutional. Marlowe respected Kurtz's final moment, not for what Kurtz did, but for the fact that he looked. He stared into the abyss and pronounced judgment on himself. That takes a kind of terrible courage. Most of us never face that final honesty. We die comfortable, surrounded by the stories we've told ourselves. Kurtz died seeing clearly. Whether that's admirable or pitiful depends on who you ask. The story doesn't hand you an answer. Conrad was too smart for that. He gives you the question and trusts you to sit with it. That's what great literature does. It makes you think, not tells you what to think. And it's only about 100 pages long. That's the astonishing thing. This little novella contains empires, psychology, philosophy, horror, love, lies, and the meaning of civilization, all in 100 pages. The physical journey is short. Brussels to the Congo and back, a few months. But the psychological journey is infinite. Marlowe is still traveling it on that yacht on the Thames. He'll never arrive. Let that settle. Now let's move from the story to the man who wrote it, because Joseph Conrad's own life was a journey as extraordinary as anything Marlowe described. And it starts in an unexpected place. Let's meet the man behind the darkness, Joseph Conrad, one of the greatest writers in the English language. And English wasn't even his first language. It wasn't his second either. He was born Józef Theodor Conrad Korzeniowski in 1857, not in England, not in France, in Berdichev, a town in what was then the Russian Empire, now part of Ukraine. His parents were Polish nobles, not rich but proud. His father Apollo was a poet, a translator, and a fierce revolutionary who dreamed of freeing Poland from Russian imperial control. Apollo's revolutionary activities caught the attention of the Russian authorities. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to exile. The whole family, father, mother, and 4-year-old Józef, were sent north into the Russian interior. Exile in northern Russia meant bitter cold, isolation, and poverty. The family lived in a series of dismal towns, far from everything they knew. The conditions were designed to break the spirit slowly. Conrad's mother Iwa was the first to fall. Weakened by the harsh conditions, she developed tuberculosis. She died when Józef was 7 years old, a boy watching his mother disappear by inches. 4 years later, Apollo followed. Broken by grief and exile, he died when Józef was 11. The boy walked behind his father's coffin through the streets of Krakow. An orphan at 11 years old, his uncle Tadeusz took him in. A practical, steady, Affectionate man who gave the orphan the stability his parents' revolutionary lives had never provided. Uncle Tadeusz's was the anchor Józef needed. At 16, Józef announced his plan. He was going to sea. His uncle was stunned. A Polish boy from the middle of a landlocked country, with no maritime tradition, no connections, no experience, wanting to be a sailor. No ocean within hundreds of miles. No family sailors, no money. Just a boy who looked at maps the way Marlowe did, with hunger, with longing, with the certainty that the world was waiting. He went to Marseille at 17, the French port city. He joined the French merchant marine and learned to sail. The sea became his first real home, the first place that felt like it was truly his. His years in France were wild. There are rumors of gun running to Spanish revolutionaries, gambling debts, a mysterious chest wound that might have been a duel, or might have been a suicide attempt. He left France and joined the British merchant marine. For the next 16 years, he sailed the world under the British flag. Asia, Australia, Africa, the Indian Ocean. The whole spinning globe became his classroom. English was his third language. He learned Polish first, then French, then English, and he was nearly 30 before he spoke it fluently. The language he would master more completely than most native speakers ever do. He climbed the ranks steadily, ordinary seaman to able seaman to second mate to first mate to captain. 16 years of discipline, competence, and the practical wisdom that comes from reading water and weather. Then came 1890, the year that changed everything. Conrad signed a contract to captain a steamboat in the Belgian Congo, the journey that would haunt him and produce his masterpiece. He traveled the same route Marlowe would travel in the story he'd later write. Brussels, the coast, upriver. Every horror Marlowe describes, Conrad saw with his own eyes first. Fiction came from fact. What he saw shattered him. The chain gangs were real. The grove of dying workers was real. The ivory obsession, the casual brutality, the total indifference to human suffering, all of it documented in his diary. Conrad fell desperately ill. Malaria and dysentery struck him down in the jungle. He lay burning with fever on a steamer much like Marlowe's, carried downstream more dead than alive. The Congo nearly killed him. He later called it the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience. Those were his exact words. Not fiction, not metaphor. A first-hand judgment from a man who was there. His health never fully recovered. The Congo broke something in his body permanently. Gout, recurring fevers, nerve pain. The jungle's parting gifts. Carried in his bones for the remaining 34 years of his life. After the Congo, his sea career wound down. His health couldn't sustain it. The world was changing too. Steam replacing sail. Companies replacing captains. Conrad needed a new life. He found one at a desk. He chose to write in English, his third language. Not Polish, the language of his parents and his childhood. Not French, the language of his youth. English, the tongue of the sea that had made him who he was. His first novel, Almayer's Folly, was published in 1895. He was 37 years old. Most writers start young. Conrad started with a lifetime of experience already behind him. Every sentence was earned. Imagine it. Writing literary masterpieces in a language you didn't speak until you were almost 30. It's like a painter who didn't pick up a brush until middle age and then produced the Sistine Chapel. Astonishing. Heart of Darkness was published in 1899, first serialized in Blackwood's magazine. 9 years after the Congo journey, the horror had fermented in him, transforming memory into art. He drew directly from his Congo diary. Real places became fiction. Real horrors were shaped into narrative. But Conrad did something more than report. He found the universal inside the specific. The real person behind Kurtz was likely a composite. Several men Conrad encountered in Africa contributed pieces, but one name stands out above the rest. Léon Rom, a Belgian officer. Léon Rom decorated the flower beds around his station with severed human heads. That detail went directly into the novella. The skulls on Kurtz's fence posts weren't invented. They were transcribed from reality. Another source was a man named Klein, a company agent who actually died on Conrad's steamer during the return journey. Klein means small in German. Conrad changed it to Kurtz. Kurtz means short. Kurtz means short, an ironic name for a tall, imposing figure. Conrad loved these contradictions. The name itself is a lie, just like everything else about the character, just like everything about the colonial enterprise. In 1896, Conrad married Jessie George. An unlikely match. She was practical and patient. He was intense and prone to dark moods. But it worked. She gave him the stability writing demanded. Jessie managed their household, raised their sons, and kept the world at bay while Conrad wrestled with his prose. He could spend an entire morning on a single paragraph. She made sure he had those mornings. Lord Jim followed in 1900. Another story about a man tested and found wanting. Another journey into the gap between who we think we are and who we become under pressure. Nostromo came in 1904, his most ambitious novel. Set in a fictional South American republic, it explored revolution, silver mining, and the corrupting power of wealth on an entire nation. The Secret Agent appeared in 1907, a spy novel set in London. Anarchists, double agents, a bombing plot. Conrad was decades ahead of his time, writing thrillers before the genre existed. Money was a constant worry. Literary acclaim came slowly. Conrad's books were admired by critics but didn't sell in large numbers. For years, the family lived modestly, sometimes borrowing from friends. He battled depression, writer's block, physical pain from gout, and the old Congo injuries. Some mornings he stared at the page for hours without writing a word. The darkness he wrote about lived inside him too. His friendship with Ford Madox Ford sustained him through the worst years. They collaborated, argued, supported each other. Ford understood the isolation of the writing life. They shared it like sailors sharing a watch. Henry James admired Conrad's work enormously. Two immigrants to the English language who mastered it more fully than most native speakers. They recognized something in each other. The outsider's gift for seeing clearly. Conrad was offered a knighthood late in life. He refused it. The former Polish exile, the man of 3 countries, chose to stay independent. No title would capture what he was. He remained simply Conrad. He died on August 3, 1924, age 66. Heart failure at his home in Bishopsbourne, Kent. The sea captain who became a writer, finally at rest in English earth. His gravestone in Canterbury bears his original Polish name, Krzyzeniowski. Even in death, he carried both identities. The Polish boy and the English master, together under one stone, neither forgotten. A man of 3 countries, Poland gave him his soul, the exile's longing and the revolutionary's fire. France gave him his youth, adventure and the sea. England gave him his language, and through it, immortality. Now let's place Heart of Darkness in its historical moment. Because this story isn't just literature, it's a document, written at the exact moment when European colonialism was at its most brutal and most confident. The 1890s. The scramble for Africa was at its peak. European powers were carving the continent into territories with rulers and straight lines, treating millions of people as resources to be managed. King Leopold II of Belgium controlled the Congo personally. Not Belgium, Leopold himself. He ran it as a private business empire from his palace in Brussels. An entire nation as one man's personal property. Leopold never once visited the Congo, not once. He ruled it entirely from Brussels, signing orders, collecting profits, receiving ivory, while remaining thousands of miles from the suffering his orders caused. The Congo Free State. That was its official name. It was neither free nor a state. It was a forced labor camp the size of Western Europe, operated for the profit of one king and his business partners. Rubber and ivory. Those were the products. Extracted through a system of forced labor, hostage-taking, and punishment so extreme that it defies description. Entire villages enslaved to meet production quotas. Workers who failed to meet their rubber quotas faced horrifying punishment. Hands were cut off as proof that discipline had been enforced. Soldiers brought back severed hands the way other workers brought back rubber. Millions died. The estimates are staggering. Between 5 and 10 million Congolese people killed through forced labor, starvation, disease, and direct violence during Leopold's rule. An entire population decimated for profit. Conrad witnessed this system in 1890, before most Europeans had any idea what was happening. Before journalists documented it, before campaigns protested it, he saw it with a sailor's clear eyes and remembered. His novella was among the first literary works to expose what European colonialism actually looked like on the ground. Not the maps and medals, the chains and graves. Arta's testimony, published while the crimes were still ongoing. Roger Casement was an Irish diplomat Conrad met in the Congo. They traveled together briefly. Casement would later write the official report that finally shocked the world into acknowledging what Leopold had done. Casement's report came in 1904. Detailed, documented, undeniable. He interviewed survivors, collected testimony, and presented the evidence to the British government. The world could no longer look away. The Congo Reform Association formed almost immediately, one of the first international human rights campaigns in history. Writers, politicians, and ordinary citizens demanded that Leopold's private empire be dismantled. Mark Twain joined the fight. He wrote King Leopold's Soliloquy, a savage satire imagining the Belgian king defending himself against the evidence. Twain's humor was weaponized for justice, and it cut deep. Under mounting international pressure, Leopold was finally forced to hand the Congo to the Belgian state in 1908. His personal empire ended, but not the suffering. Belgium continued many of the same practices. The damage was done. A nation traumatized across generations. Communities shattered. Trust in outsiders destroyed. The scars Leopold carved into the Congo would take far more than a century to begin healing. Conrad's story captures something the Casement report couldn't. Not just the facts, but the system. The way ordinary men become complicit. The way language disguises theft as commerce and murder as administration. The trading company in the novella mirrors the real companies that operated in the Congo. Faceless, profit-driven, indifferent to everything except the bottom line. The system didn't need villains. It just needed employees. The pilgrims represent every bureaucrat who ever profited from suffering they chose not to see. They didn't hold the whips. They just counted the ivory. And they slept well at night because the paperwork was clean. The Victorian era's great contradiction was this: it believed in civilization and practiced barbarism simultaneously. It preached progress while committing atrocities. And the contradiction was invisible to those inside it. Europeans told themselves they were bringing light to dark places. Civilization, Christianity, commerce, the 3 C's. Conrad peeled back each one and showed the darkness underneath. Light was the lie. Darkness was the truth. The white man's burden, Kipling's phrase, was the era's favorite justification. We must civilize them. It's our duty. Conrad tears that apart without ever preaching. He simply shows you what the duty looked like in practice. Conrad's method was to show, not tell. He never writes a polemic. He never delivers a lecture. He puts you on the steamer, lets you see what Marlowe sees, and trusts you to draw your own conclusions. The Boer War began the very year the novella was published, 1899. The British Empire fighting in South Africa. Europe's colonial project was already cracking at the edges when Conrad wrote his warning. Heart of Darkness anticipated the 20th century's great disillusionment with empire. Within 50 years, most European colonies would be gone. Conrad saw the end coming before anyone else did. World War I would prove that the darkness wasn't only in Africa. It lived in Europe too. Trenches, gas, machine guns, the civilized world turning its technology on itself. Kurtz's horror multiplied by millions. Now let's talk about the criticism, because no discussion of this book is complete without Chinua Achebe. His 1975 lecture changed everything about how we read Heart of Darkness. And he had a point. Achibe's argument was direct and devastating. He said Conrad used Africa as a backdrop for European psychological drama, that the continent existed in the novella only as a setting for white men's moral crisis. Achebe pointed to the language. African characters in the novella are described with words that strip them of full humanity. They howl, they grunt, they are limbs and eyes and movement, but rarely people with names and voices. African characters in the story rarely speak. When they do, it's brief. They remain largely nameless. The helmsman, the fireman, the mistress. They exist in the narrative as functions, not as full human beings with their own stories. Achebe's verdict was blunt. He called Conrad a thoroughgoing racist. The phrase landed like a thunderbolt in literary studies. It forced scholars to re-examine a text they'd celebrated for decades without question. The argument has real force. When you look closely, Africa in the novella does function primarily as a mirror for European anxiety. The jungle exists to test white men. The Africans exist to be scenery for that test. But there's a counter-argument. Conrad was criticizing imperialism from within it. The dehumanizing language may represent how Europeans actually saw Africans, not Conrad endorsing that view, but exposing it. Perhaps the Africans' silence in the story represents how Europeans refused to hear them. Not Conrad's failure of imagination, but his faithful reproduction of a system that deliberately silenced millions of voices. Here's the honest question: does the text overcome the blindness it depicts, or does it reproduce it? Does Conrad transcend his era's racism, or is he trapped inside it even as he critiques it? Can it be both? There's no easy answer. And that's exactly what makes the debate worth having. The discomfort it creates is productive. It forces readers to think about who gets to tell stories and whose stories get told. Achebe's critique didn't cancel Conrad. It deepened him. The novella is now read with more awareness, more complexity, more honesty. The conversation between the two writers made both of them more important. Good literature survives hard questions. It becomes richer for the interrogation. A book that collapses under criticism wasn't worth reading. A book that deepens under criticism is a masterpiece being properly examined. Other post-colonial scholars followed Achebe's lead. Gayatri Spivak asked who has the right to speak for the subaltern. Edward Said examined how Western literature constructed the East, and Africa, as its opposite. Said argued that Conrad was caught between critique and complicity. He saw the horror clearly, but couldn't fully escape his own position within the system he criticized. Both seeing and not seeing, at the same time. Today the novella is taught alongside Achebe's response in universities around the world. The conversation is the education. Not one voice alone, but two voices, and the readers, making meaning together. Feminist readings add another layer. The women in Heart of Darkness, the aunt, the intended, the African mistress, the knitting women are symbols more than people. Achebe's critique applies to gender as well as race. Psychological readings find Jung's shadow archetype everywhere. Kurtz is Marlowe's dark double, the self he could become if his restraint failed. The journey upriver is a journey into the unconscious mind's deepest territory. Freudian readers see the river journey as a descent into the repressed psyche. Each mile upstream strips away another layer of civilized behavior until the primitive AD is exposed. Raw, powerful, terrifying, honest. Existentialist readings focus on the absurdity. The French warship shelling an empty continent. The brickmaker who makes no bricks. The manager whose only talent is not dying. Everything is meaningless, and that's the horror. Marxist readings see ivory as capital. The entire system exists to extract wealth from one place and deliver it to another. Workers are expendable. Profit is the only law. The Congo is capitalism without its mask. Ecological readings see the jungle as the real protagonist. It judges Kurtz. It claims him. It waits with ancient patience for every human enterprise to fail and then reclaims the ground. The wilderness always wins. Each reading reveals something new. The text is almost inexhaustible. 100 pages holding 100 different conversations. That's the mark of great literature. It grows every time you look at it differently. And then there's the film, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979, the most famous adaptation of Heart of Darkness, and one of the greatest films ever made. He moved the story to Vietnam. The Congo became the Mekong. The trading company became the military. Kurtz became a rogue colonel who'd gone native in the Cambodian jungle, and Marlowe became Captain Willard, sent upriver to terminate Kurtz's command. Marlon Brando played Kurtz, enormous, sweating, whispering in the shadows of a jungle temple. When he murmured, the horror, it became cinema's darkest, most quoted moment. Conrad's words, Brando's voice. Coppola's production nearly destroyed him. Over budget, over schedule, typhoons, heart attacks, breakdowns. The director said he went too far. Just like Kurtz. The making of the film became its own Heart of Darkness. Martin Sheen replaced Marlowe as Captain Willard. Same journey upstream. Same growing dread. Same impossible choice at the end. What do you do when you find the monster and recognize yourself in him? The helicopter attack scene with Wagner's music blaring. That's pure Conrad reimagined. The absurdity of the French warship shelling an empty coast, transformed into helicopters playing opera while destroying a village. Magnificent and horrifying. Orson Welles planned his own adaptation in the 1930s. A radio drama that would have been performed entirely in first person. You would hear only Marlowe's voice, just as Conrad intended. It was never completed. In 2012, a video game called Spec Ops, the line reimagined the story as a military shooter. Players didn't just watch the journey into darkness. They participated in it. They became Kurtz without realizing it. The story keeps being retold because the question keeps being asked. What happens when good intentions meet unchecked power? What happens when there are no witnesses, no rules, no one watching? The answer is always the same. Every war produces its Kurtz. Every occupation. Every corporation that operates where laws don't reach. The figure recurs because human nature doesn't change. Only the setting changes. The river keeps flowing. T.S. Eliot used the phrase Mr. Kurtz. He dead as the epigraph for his poem The Hollow Men. Conrad's character became a shorthand for the 20th century's spiritual emptiness. One novella, rippling outward for 100 years. Conrad influenced Fitzgerald, Faulkner, Graham Greene, N.G.B. Wathiengo, writers from every continent. His prose style, dense, layered, circling its subject, became a template for modernist fiction. He changed how stories get told. His prose itself is an experience. Impressionistic, circling, approaching meaning the way fog approaches a ship. You feel the truth before you see it. That disorientation isn't a flaw, it's the whole method. It's how darkness actually works. Conrad pioneered something in narrative technique that we now take for granted. The unreliable narrator. The story told at a distance. Truth arriving not directly, but filtered through someone else's voice and memory. The frame narrative of Heart of Darkness is brilliant in its architecture. A story told by someone who heard it told by someone who lived it. 3 layers between you and the truth. Each layer adds distortion and meaning. This distance creates ambiguity. We never get the raw truth. We get Marlowe's version, filtered through the unnamed narrator's memory. Every detail might be slightly off. Every emphasis might be Marlowe's bias, not fact. Modern literature inherited this. Every unreliable narrator in fiction owes something to Marlowe. Every story that makes you question who's telling it and why. That's Conrad's legacy running through the veins of the novel. What makes the novella's structure so brilliant is that it mimics how we actually learn dark truths in real life. Nobody hands you the horror directly. You hear rumors first, fragments, other people's versions, then you piece it together. That's how truth works. Not as revelation but as accumulation. Detail by detail, story by story, until the shape of the thing becomes undeniable. Conrad understood this before the modernists gave it a name. Conrad's influence on spy fiction runs deep. John le Carré, Graham Greene. writers who explored moral ambiguity in the shadow world of espionage. The gap between official narrative and ground truth. That's Conrad's territory. War literature after Conrad could never go back to simple heroism. He showed that the real story is always more complicated than the official version. The dispatches lie, the reports omit. Only the witnesses know. Heart of Darkness is one of the most taught texts in the English-speaking world. Universities assign it year after year. It appears on more syllabi than almost any other work of fiction. It endures because it provokes. Students wrestle with it every year. Is it anti-colonial or colonial? Progressive or regressive? The answer is always more complicated than the question. That's the sign of a text that refuses to be simple. The Congo today is the Democratic Republic of Congo, still bearing the scars of Leopold's legacy, still struggling with the consequences of borders drawn by Europeans who never walked the land they divided. Conflict minerals, cobalt mining, coltan for phones and computers. The modern versions of the ivory trade continue in the same region. Different products, same pattern, global demand driving local suffering, profits flowing outward. The story's relevance hasn't faded because the machinery of exploitation simply changed products. Ivory became rubber. Rubber became uranium. Uranium became coltan. The river still flows in one direction, from the powerless to the powerful. The jungle Conrad described is now threatened. Deforestation, mining, agriculture. The wilderness that swallowed Kurtz is itself being swallowed. The thing that judged humanity is being consumed by it. The Congo River still flows, second longest in Africa, deepest in the world. Powerful, mysterious, essential. The same water Marlowe navigated still pushes past the same banks, indifferent to the stories told about it. What would Marlowe see today if he traveled upriver? Different boats, different cargo, different languages on the radio. But would the fundamental questions be different? Would the darkness have changed its shape? Perhaps different horrors. Perhaps the same human patterns wearing new clothing. Power concentrated. Voices silenced. Profits extracted. The comfortable refusing to see what their comfort costs. Conrad would recognize it all. The novella teaches us to look, really look, not at the surface, at what's underneath, at the systems we participate in without examining, at the stories we tell ourselves to sleep well at night. Kurtz's trajectory, from idealist to monster, isn't unique to colonialism. It happens everywhere power goes unchecked. In boardrooms and battlefields, in governments and families. The pattern is universal. That's why the story won't die. It happens in corporations where the numbers matter more than the people. In governments where the policy overrides the citizen. In any system where the distance between decision and consequence is large enough to allow indifference. The restraint question is the one that stays with you longest. What holds you back when no one is watching? Not the law. The law isn't watching in the jungle. Not reputation. There's no one to impress. Something else. Something fragile. Conrad suggests it's not civilization that provides restraint. Civilization is just the framework. The actual restraint comes from somewhere personal, individual, interior. And it's terrifyingly fragile. Anyone can lose it. Marlowe's honesty is the novella's moral center. He never claims to be better than Kurtz. He says plainly, I was within a hair's breadth, meaning he could have fallen too. He was lucky. That's all. That humility is rare and valuable. Most people who survive ordeals construct heroic narratives about themselves. Marlowe refuses. He tells the truth about his own weakness. And that truth is what makes him trustworthy. And the lie. Marlowe's one great moral compromise. Telling the intended that Kurtz's last word was her name. Was it his worst failure or his finest moment? Mercy or cowardice? The novella refuses to judge. He chose kindness over truth. And he lived with the cost of that choice for the rest of his life. Every time he tells the story on that yacht, he's asking, did I do the right thing? He never gets an answer. Every listener must decide for themselves. Would you have told the truth? Would you have broken that woman's last source of comfort to serve a principle? There is no right answer. and the story knows it. That ambiguity is the novella's greatest achievement. It doesn't comfort you with answers. It sits you down in the dark and asks you to think. And thinking, real thinking, is the opposite of darkness. It's the only light there is. Conrad gave us 100 pages that contain the entire 20th century before it happened. Imperialism, psychology, existentialism, environmental destruction, the fragility of morality, the persistence of greed, all in one slim novella. All in a tale about a man who went upriver and came back changed. The simplest possible summary for the most complex possible story. A journey there and back, but the back is never the same as the there. The final lines of the novella deserve one more visit. The narrator looks out at the Thames. The river that had been golden at sunset is now black, and it seems to flow not toward the sea, but toward an immense darkness. London and Brussels are no different from the Congo. That's the final argument. The darkness isn't exotic. It isn't far away. It's here. It's in the comfortable drawing rooms and the polished offices and the quiet streets. The veneer of civilization is thin. Conrad lived long enough to see World War I prove that in ways even he couldn't have imagined. Europe's own heart of darkness, erupting at industrial scale on its own soil. His last years were honored but tired. A man who had seen too much, written too much, carried the Congo and the sea, and 3 languages inside one body. The recognition came, but it came late and it came heavy. Writing was his way of processing, turning personal horror into universal art. The Congo could have destroyed him, it nearly did, but he refused to be silenced by what he'd seen. Instead, he transformed it. He transformed his worst experience into one of the greatest works in the English language. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. That's meaning wrested from meaninglessness with bare hands. A Polish orphan who became one of the English language's supreme artists. A sailor who became a philosopher. A man who went into the darkness and came back carrying light. Not much light, but enough. That transformation, from darkness into meaning, is its own kind of journey, not upriver, but inward. Not toward horror, but through it. The act of writing as an act of survival. The story told so the teller can sleep. Marlowe tells his story on the Thames so he doesn't have to carry it alone anymore. Conrad wrote his novella for the same reason. And tonight, you listened for yours. The weight is shared now. That's how stories work. And now, as we come to the end, let's let the river carry us gently home. The story is told. The questions are planted. The darkness and the light have found their places. Time to rest. The story is done. But it stays with you the way fog stays on a river, clinging to everything, changing how familiar shapes look, making the ordinary feel strange and important and beautiful. Remember where we started. Men on a yacht at sunset. One voice in the dark. A story that began with golden light and ended in shadow. The simplest frame for the most complicated truth. Marlowe told his story to make sense of it. Maybe that's all any of us do with the things we've seen. Shape them into words. Offer them to someone willing to listen, and hope the telling brings peace. The questions don't resolve. They never do, with the best stories. They deepen. They become part of how you see the world tomorrow morning. And that's not a burden, that's a gift. What is the darkness? The jungle, the human soul. The space between who we are and who we pretend to be. The distance between comfort and truth, all of it. None of it. Whatever you need it to mean tonight. Conrad didn't preach. He showed. He trusted you to feel it. And if you felt anything tonight, curiosity, unease, wonder, sadness, then the story did its work. That's enough. That's more than enough. Maybe you'll read the novella yourself someday. It's short. You could finish it in an afternoon. And you'd find things in it I couldn't mention tonight. Your own river, your own darkness, your own questions. Or maybe just knowing the shape of the story is enough for tonight. A man went upriver. He found the horror. He came back and told someone. And now you know too. That's the chain. You're part of it now. The river flows on whether we watch it or close our eyes. That's one of the comforting things about rivers. They don't need your attention. They just keep going, steady, patient, endless. Think of Marlowe on that yacht. Tired, honest, unable to forget but finally able to rest. His story told, his burden shared, his pipe cold, his eyes closing at last. He earned his silence. Think of Kurtz in his final moment, seeing everything at last. Whatever terror that vision held, it was also clarity. And clarity, even terrible clarity, has its own kind of peace once the seeing is done. Think of the intended in her parlor, choosing to believe the beautiful lie, holding Kurtz's memory like a candle in both hands, sheltering it from the wind. She found what she needed, let her keep it. We all make that choice sometimes. Truth or comfort, seeing or looking away, and neither choice is wrong, exactly. It depends on the moment. It depends on what you can carry. Tonight, comfort is fine. You've earned it. You traveled all the way upriver tonight. You met Kurtz. You heard the horror. You watched Marlowe lie to save a woman's heart. That's a full journey. Time to come home from it. The world and its questions will be there tomorrow. The Congo will still flow. The novella will still sit on its shelf. Kurtz will still whisper his horror. But none of that needs you right now. Right now, the river sounds are all around you. Water against the yacht's hull, a soft lapping rhythm. The tide moving the vessel gently back and forth, the oldest lullaby there is. The Thames at night. Dark water reflecting distant city lights, small golden points scattered on the surface like fallen stars. The river holding light and darkness together without choosing between them. Marlowe's voice has gone quiet. The other men sit in the silence he left behind. Nobody fills it. Nobody needs to. The silence after a good story is part of the story itself. The tide turns slowly. The river changes direction beneath the yacht without anyone noticing. Everything shifts gently seaward. Everything downstream. Everything moving toward morning at its own unhurried pace. Your breathing settles, steady and deep like the river's current. In and out, in and out. The rhythm of the water and the rhythm of your breath finding each other, matching, merging. No need to hold on to any of this. The story is safe. It's been told for over 100 years, and it will be told for 100 more. It doesn't need anything from you right now. Just rest. The fog lifts when it's ready. The morning comes when it comes. You don't need to wait for it or watch for it. It arrives on its own, the way rivers arrive at the sea, naturally, inevitably, gently. For now, just the sound of water, gentle, endless, patient. The oldest sound on earth, older than any story, older than any language. Water finding its way downhill. The simplest thing there is. The yacht rocks softly on the tide, back and forth, slow and sure. The motion of a cradle, the motion of a ship at anchor. The motion of the world turning beneath you while you rest. All the characters we met tonight are resting too. Marlowe on his yacht. Kurtz in whatever peace he found. The intended in her preserved grief. Conrad in his English earth. All of them at rest. Marlowe has set down his pipe, leaning back against the yacht's rail, eyes closing. The gray at his temples silver in the starlight. The storyteller becoming just a man, just a sleeper, just a breath. The story is safe inside you now. It doesn't need anything from you right now. Not understanding, not analysis, not judgment. Just the warmth of having been heard. Stories live in the listening. You gave it that. Just the dark. Just the quiet. 3 things that existed before any story was ever told and will exist after the last story ends. The oldest comforts, the most reliable friends. The lights of London glow faintly in the distance, soft and far away, like memories of a city rather than the city itself. Everything distant tonight, everything receding, everything at peace. Everything distant, everything at peace. The river asks nothing. The darkness conceals nothing. The quiet holds you the way water holds a floating leaf, without effort, without thought, without end. The current carries you. No effort needed. No direction to choose. The river knows where it's going. It's been going there for thousands of years. Trust it. Let it take you where you need to be. Downstream. Always downstream. toward morning, toward rest, toward the wide calm sea where all rivers end and all journeys finish and everything finally, beautifully, quietly stops moving. Thank you for listening tonight. For traveling all that way with Marlowe and with me. For staying with the darkness long enough to find what's human in it. Sweet dreams and good night. The river flows on. Silence, darkness, sleep.